June 6, 1944, 5:00 a.m. Crisbeck Battery, Normandy coast. The binoculars quivered, just slightly, as Oberleutnant zur See Walter Ohmsen painted a line across the horizon, forever searing into his memory an image that would stalk his nights for all the years to come. Through the hazy pre-dawn light, he beheld a truth that utterly dismantled every single guarantee issued by the High Command. The English Channel, that very moat which had so faithfully guarded the Third Reich's western edge, had undergone a terrifying metamorphosis into a highway of steel, an unending armada of ships stretching from one edge of the world to the other, their dark forms bleeding together into a single, relentless mass of impending doom. The invasion force numbered 6,139 vessels, a staggering collection of 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 ancillary craft, and 864 merchant ships, all brought to life by the hands of over 195,000 naval personnel from 8 Allied nations. At 5:52 a.m., a command crackled through to Ohmsen's battery, the order to unleash hell. Precisely 3 minutes later, at 5:55 a.m., the very first shells from his 210mm Czech-made Škoda cannons began their graceful, deadly arc toward the heart of the invasion fleet. They were but drops of water against an onrushing tsunami. His battery locked horns with the U.S. cruisers USS Tuscaloosa and USS Quincy, and the formidable battleship USS Nevada. By 6:30 a.m., his guns would taste victory, claiming the destroyer USS Corry, the sole American destroyer to be lost on D-Day. From the sanctuary of his reinforced concrete observation post perched atop the Crisbeck battery, the 32-year-old naval officer had just earned the grim distinction of being the first German defender to lay eyes upon and engage the Allied invasion of Fortress Europe. What Ohmsen perceived through his Zeiss rangefinder that morning was something far more profound than a mere invasion fleet. It was the tangible, physical embodiment of an industrial power that Nazi propaganda had swore to him, again and again, simply could not exist. The crushing mathematics of defeat were sailing directly toward him at a steady 8 knots. The great transformation had commenced. Within mere hours, German officers all across the Normandy landscape would bear witness to a staggering display of Allied industrial might, a spectacle that would obliterate every last assumption they held about their enemies' capabilities and signal the very beginning of the end for Hitler's 1,000-year Reich. The preceding darkness of June 5th had whispered ominous portents. At Army Group B headquarters in La Roche-Guyon, a full 50 miles from the coast, Lieutenant General Hans Speidel, who had served as Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel since April 15, 1944, was vigilantly monitoring a flow of increasingly unsettling reports. Rommel himself was conspicuously absent, away in Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday, utterly convinced that the foul weather made any invasion attempt impossible. Then, at 1:20 a.m., the 7th Army received the shocking notification. Massive parachute drops were occurring all across Normandy. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, a force numbering over 13,000 men, were being delivered from the skies by a fleet of Douglas C-47 Skytrains. General der Artillerie Erich Marx, commanding the 84th Corps from his headquarters in St. Lo, understood the dire implication in an instant. A hardened veteran of the Eastern Front who had left a leg at Stalingrad, Marx was gifted with the kind of tactical instinct that years of brutal combat had sharpened to a razor's edge. And yet even Marx, one of the Wehrmacht's most seasoned commanders, could not possibly conceive of the sheer, overwhelming scale of what was approaching. The German defenders had meticulously prepared for an invasion. What they had not prepared for was an industrial avalanche, a force that would bury them alive under a mountain of sheer material superiority. Vice Admiral Friedrich Ruge, appointed as a naval advisor to Rommel in November 1943, had dedicated months to the painstaking inspection of the coastal defenses. Born into a naval dynasty in 1894, Rouge possessed a deeper understanding of maritime operations than any other German officer in France. He had relentlessly pushed for more mines, for more obstacles, for more guns. But as he would later confess in his memoir, Rommel in Normandy, "We were preparing to fight the last war. They were bringing the next one." The German High Command had deluded itself into believing that the Allies could, at best, mount an invasion with perhaps 20 divisions, supported by a fleet of maybe 3,000 vessels. They had founded these calculations on their own capabilities, on their own limitations, on their own bitter experience of scarcity and ever-deepening industrial exhaustion. After 5 long years of war, as the first faint light of dawn crept across the Normandy coast on June 6th, German observers tucked away in bunkers and observation posts from Cherbourg to Le Havre began to report the impossible. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands. Not a raid, not a feint, but the largest amphibious invasion in the entire sweep of human history. At strong point WN-62, which overlooked the stretch of sand that would soon be known as Omaha Beach, Gefreiter Heinrich, Severlo squinted through his machine gun's embrasure at 5:45 a.m. The 20-year-old farm boy from Metzingen had never laid eyes on the ocean before being stationed in Normandy. Now he saw no ocean at all, only an endless expanse of steel. Ships everywhere, Severlo would later record in his memoir. Big ships, small ships, fat ships with flat bottoms. Destroyers darting back and forth like agitated sheepdogs. The horizon had vanished. I tried to count them, but I gave up at 100. There were thousands. Across the entire 50-mile invasion front, German officers and soldiers were struck by the same stunning, soul-crushing realization. They were confronting not just superior numbers, but a completely different order of magnitude. At 5:30 a.m., the naval bombardment began. At the fleet's disposal were 5 battleships, 20 cruisers, 65 destroyers, and 2 monitors. For the German defenders, it was their brutal first lesson in American industrial mathematics. The USS Texas, a single ship, fired 255 rounds from her 14-inch guns in the first hour alone. Each shell carried a weight of 1,400 pounds. In just 60 minutes, one vessel had delivered 178 tons of high explosives, an amount greater than what many German artillery regiments held in their total ammunition reserves. Before the first Allied soldier had even set foot on the beaches, the Allied naval forces had unleashed approximately 50,000 shells from their destroyers, 23,000 shells from their cruisers, and 3,500 shells from their battleships, roughly 130,000 tons of explosive ordnance. General der Infanterie Günther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Commander-in-Chief West, would later testify, "We had prepared to fight soldiers. We found ourselves fighting factories." At 6:00 a.m., as the naval shells continued their relentless work of pulverizing the Atlantic Wall, German defenders witnessed the second terrifying demonstration of Allied industrial superiority. The sky filled with aircraft, not in dozens or hundreds, but in thousands. Allied air forces flew over 14,000 sorties in direct support of the landings, having already secured absolute air supremacy long before the invasion began. The Luftwaffe, in stark contrast, had approximately 300 operational aircraft in all of France. On D-Day, they managed to fly a mere 319 sorties. The Allies flew 14,674. For every single German plane that took to the air, there were 46 Allied aircraft waiting. The mathematics were not just unfavorable, they were utterly absurd. Major Josef Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, made the only Luftwaffe attack on the invasion beaches that morning. With just his wingman, Heinz Wodarczyk, by his side, he strafed Sword Beach once before being forced to flee from the dozens of Allied fighters that swarmed him. This famous incident, documented in multiple historical accounts, served as a stark demonstration of the complete and utter impotence of German air power. Despite the overwhelming firepower arrayed against them, German defenders at certain positions initially clung to the belief that they might just hold. At Omaha Beach, the 352nd Infantry Division occupied excellent defensive positions on the bluffs overlooking the shore. Machine guns nested in concrete bunkers created deadly interlocking fields of fire. The first waves of American infantry from the 1st and 29th Divisions walked directly into a slaughter. From the very moment the Americans hit the beach at 6:30 a.m., machine gun fire erupted from the resistance nests. Heinrich Severloh, manning an MG-42 machine gun at Widerstands Nest 62, fired over 12,000 rounds that morning, a fact documented by his own testimony. He watched American soldiers fall by the dozens and then by the hundreds. Bodies floated listlessly in the surf. The beach itself began to turn red with blood. For one brief, fleeting moment, it seemed as if the Atlantic Wall might actually hold. Then the destroyers came. At approximately 8 a.m., with the situation on Omaha Beach having reached a critical point and General Omar Bradley seriously considering evacuation, something utterly unprecedented occurred. American destroyers, ignoring the grave risk of grounding or striking mines, closed to within 1,000 yards of the beach, point-blank range for naval guns. The USS McCook, USS Carmack, USS Doyle, and USS Frankfurt turned their 5-inch guns on individual German strongpoints. At such a close range, they simply couldn't miss. This daring action, well documented in naval records, proved to be the decisive factor in breaking the German defense at Omaha. This was the moment that German officers began to grasp the true, terrifying meaning of American industrial might. It wasn't just the staggering number of ships, it was the chilling willingness to risk them, to use them as if they were expendable assets. The destroyer USS Corey was lost, but immediately others surged forward to take its place. Ships were not precious, irreplaceable assets as they were for the Kriegsmarine. They were tools, and America had thousands more. As the morning bled into the afternoon, German observers witnessed something that completely defied their understanding of amphibious operations. The landing craft just kept coming, wave after relentless wave, hour after grueling hour. It was an endless conveyor belt of men and materiel, flowing ceaselessly from the sea to the shore. The sheer variety of specialized vessels stunned the German observers. Landing craft, tank, LCTs, disgorged 30-ton Sherman tanks directly onto the beaches. Landing ship tanks, LSTs, massive vessels 328 feet long, beached themselves and opened their cavernous bow doors to discharge entire tank companies. KW amphibious trucks swam ashore, drove up the beach, and delivered supplies directly to the combat units. By nightfall, the Allies had landed approximately 156,000 troops, 132,715 by sea and 23,400 by air. This single force exceeded the entire strength of the German 7th Army defending Normandy. In the first 24 hours, the documented Allied achievement included 156,000 personnel, 20,000 vehicles, 1,700 tanks, and 15,000 tons of supplies. The German 7th Army, tasked with defending the entire Normandy region, possessed fewer than 500 operational tanks. The Allies landed 3 times that many on the very first day. The German response to the invasion revealed not just a material inferiority, but a systemic breakdown in the face of such overwhelming enemy capability. The legendary panzer divisions, which had conquered France in a mere 6 weeks in 1940, found themselves utterly paralyzed by Allied air supremacy and naval gunfire. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit close enough to intervene on D-Day, began its counterattack at 4 p.m. The division took 3 full hours to move the 10 miles from Runeville to and through Caen. What should have been a devastating armored thrust became a tragic procession of burning vehicles. When the surviving panzers finally engaged British forces near Sword Beach, they encountered naval gunfire directed by forward observers. HMS Warspite, monitoring from 15 miles offshore, fired 15-inch shells that could penetrate any tank ever built. SS Standartenführer Kurt Meyer, commanding the 25th SS Panzergrenadier Regiment, would later write in his memoirs, "The enemy's material superiority was so great that our own strength was swept away like a wave breaking on a rock." On June 7th, D-Day +1, German reconnaissance aircraft brought back photographs that senior officers initially refused to believe. The Allies were building harbors, not capturing ports, but building them from nothing in the open sea. The Mulberry harbors represented an industrial capability on a scale that challenged comprehension. Prefabricated in Britain, These artificial ports consisted of 600,000 tons of concrete, 33 jetties, 10 miles of floating roadways, and 93 ships deliberately sunk to serve as breakwaters. Within 2 weeks, the Mulberry harbors were handling 9,000 tons of supplies daily, more than many established French ports. The Germans had spent 4 years building the Atlantic Wall to protect the ports. The Allies had simply eliminated the requirement for ports altogether. Throughout June of 1944, German commanders gradually came to realize the completeness of their intelligence failure. The elaborate deception of Operation Fortitude had successfully convinced German intelligence that the Normandy landings were merely a feint. The real invasion, they believed, would come at the Pas de Calais, led by Patton's fictitious 1st United States Army Group. For crucial weeks, German reserves remained frozen in place, waiting for an invasion that would never come. General der Panzertruppe Leo Geyer von Schweppenburg, commanding Panzergruppe West, discovered the deception when captured documents revealed Patton's actual location in Normandy, commanding the very real Third Army. As June progressed into July, the reports from German officers to higher headquarters became increasingly desperate. General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, received a call from Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel at OKW, demanding to know why the invasion hadn't been thrown back into the sea. When Keitel asked what should be done, Rundstedt famously replied, "Make peace, you fools. What else can you do?" For this brutal honesty, Rundstedt was immediately relieved of his command. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel met with Hitler on June 17 at Margiville, France. According to documented accounts, Rommel presented grim statistics showing the hopelessness of the German position. Complete Allied air supremacy, German divisions at 30% strength, and the impossibility of any daylight movement due to naval gunfire. Hitler's response was to forbid any retreat, demanding only fanatical resistance. Rommel left the meeting knowing that Germany was doomed. Within a month, he would be implicated in the July 20th assassination plot against Hitler and forced to commit suicide. Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, who survived the war, would later write in Invasion, 1944. Rommel and the Normandy Campaign. We were not defeated by better soldiers or superior strategy. We were buried under an avalanche of material. The battle for Caen demonstrated the utter futility of German resistance against Allied material superiority. On July 7, 467 RAF heavy bombers dropped 2,500 tons of bombs on Caen in just 40 minutes. More explosive power than the entire Luftwaffe possessed in all of France. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, one of Germany's best units, entered the Normandy battle with 20,540 men and 150 tanks. After 6 weeks, it had just 300 men and no tanks, losing 8,000 soldiers in the Falaise pocket alone. Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy beginning July 25th, provided the final crushing demonstration of Allied supremacy. 1,500 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, and 550 fighter bombers dropped 3,300 tons of bombs in a concentrated carpet bombing attack, targeting an area just 6,000 by 2,200 yards. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding the Panzer Lehr Division, positioned directly under the bombardment, reported, "My division has been annihilated. We are not fighting an army, we are fighting an industrial complex." The Panzer Lehr, which had entered Normandy with 190 tanks and 16,000 men, simply vanished. Of the 3,000 men in the targeted area, 1,000 died instantly, 1,000 were wounded, and 1,000 were too psychologically shattered to continue the fight. The operation's tragic friendly fire incidents killed 111 Americans and wounded 490, including Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, the highest-ranking U.S. officer killed in action in the European theater. Yet even these casualties were absorbed without affecting the operation's ultimate success. The Falaise Pocket, from August 12 to 21, 1944, became the graveyard of German forces in Normandy. The documented statistics were apocalyptic. 10,000 to 15,000 Germans killed, 40,000 to 50,000 captured, 344 tanks and self-propelled guns destroyed in the northern sector alone, 2,247 soft-skinned vehicles abandoned, and 252 artillery pieces lost. Between 20,000 and 50,000 Germans managed to escape the encirclement, but they did so as disorganized remnants rather than cohesive fighting units. The German General Staff struggled to comprehend that they were not fighting a military campaign, but an industrial equation. The 1944 production comparison starkly illustrated Allied industrial dominance. German production in 1944, aircraft, 39,807, tank production peak, 1,854 monthly in December. Military trucks, 68,000. American production in 1944, aircraft, 96,000, tanks, 29,000, military trucks, 650,000. These statistics didn't even include British, Canadian, or Soviet production. Germany was fighting the entire world's industrial output, with the production capacity of a medium-sized nation, a capacity that was being increasingly reduced by relentless bombing. Total American wartime production included 297,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, 2 million army trucks, and 41 billion rounds of ammunition. General Franz Halder, former chief of the General Staff, calculated after the war, by 1944, the Allied advantage in war production was approximately 5-1. In certain categories, like trucks, it was 10-1. We were not defeated. We were mathematically eliminated. The German officers who survived Normandy were psychologically transformed. They had witnessed not just a military defeat, but the complete invalidation of Nazi ideology about German superiority and American weakness. Young officers who had grown up under Nazism were particularly affected. They had been told that Americans were soft, spoiled by luxury, and unable to fight. Instead, they discovered that Americans had machines to do the hard work, radios to coordinate their actions, abundant ammunition to practice with, and a deep-seated confidence born from unlimited support. The suicide rate among German officers spiked dramatically. Defeat was one thing. The complete invalidation of their worldview was another. Beyond mere quantity, German officers confronted a technology gap that revealed just how far behind Germany had fallen. Proximity fuses turned anti-aircraft fire into precision killing. Radar-directed naval gunfire could hit targets miles inland with first-round accuracy. UKW amphibious trucks solved logistics problems that Germany couldn't even conceptualize. The Allied use of specialized vehicles particularly impressed German officers. Hobart's funnies, modified tanks that could clear mines, lay bridges, and destroy bunkers, solved tactical problems through engineering rather than blood. Throughout the Normandy campaign, German officers developed a particular dread of naval gunfire. The battleship HMS Rodney's 16-inch guns could fire 2,048-pound shells 23 miles inland. The USS Nevada, USS Texas, and HMS Warspite turned their main batteries into super-heavy artillery that could obliterate any target. German artillery attempting counter-battery fire against naval vessels learned the futility of their task. Ships moved. They also shot back. By July 1944, German movement in daylight had become virtually impossible. Allied fighter bombers, operating in cab ranks controlled by forward observers, could strike any target within minutes. The statistics were overwhelming. Allied aircraft in the theater numbered over 12,000. German aircraft numbered between 300 and 500. Allied sorties per day ranged from 5,000 to 8,000. German sorties, when possible, numbered between 50 and 100. The final statistics from the Normandy campaign told the story of industrial warfare. Allied achievements from June 6 to August 30, 1944. Personnel landed, 2,052,299. Vehicles landed, 438,471. Supplies landed, 3,098,259 tons. Aircraft sorties over 480,000. German losses in Normandy: killed, up to 240,000. Captured, 200,000. Tanks and assault guns lost, 2,200. Divisions destroyed, over 40. In 1954, 10 years after D-Day, surviving German officers gathered in Bonn for a private symposium on the Normandy campaign. General der Infanterie Günther Blumentritt, who had served as chief of staff to both Rundstedt and Kluge, delivered the keynote address. We learned in Normandy that war had changed fundamentally. It was no longer a contest of armies, but of economic systems. We counted divisions while they counted factories. We measured courage while they measured production. The image that haunts me still is the sight of American bulldozers pushing aside our destroyed tanks to clear roads for their supply trucks. The German officers who witnessed D-Day were permanently transformed. Hans Speidel became a NATO general, helping to integrate West Germany into the Western Alliance. Many Normandy veterans became staunch advocates for European economic integration, understanding that only by pooling their resources could European nations ever hope to match American industrial capacity. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who commanded German forces in Italy, compared his experience with those who fought in Normandy. In Italy, we could fight the Allies on relatively equal terms. In Normandy, on open ground where they could deploy their full industrial might, our forces were simply erased. On June 6, 1984, the 40th anniversary of D-Day, Walter Ohmsen returned to Crisbeck Battery as an honored guest. The former Oberleutnant zur See, now 73, stood at the same observation post where he had first sighted the invasion fleet. Speaking to gathered veterans, both Allied and German, he reflected, "40 years ago, I stood here and saw the impossible, a sea covered with ships from horizon to horizon. I knew in that moment that everything I had been told was wrong. Weak nations don't build 7,000 ships. Divided nations don't coordinate such an invasion. I fired my guns at that armada, and I might as well have been throwing stones at the tide. We sank one destroyer, damaged a few others. For every ship we hit, 100 passed unharmed." Young officers today study tactics from Normandy. But the real lesson is simpler. In modern war, the side that can produce the most wins. We learned that industrial capacity is military capacity. The sea of ships I saw that morning was not just an invasion fleet. It was American industrial might made visible. The German officers who watched nearly 7,000 Allied ships approach on D-Day witnessed more than an invasion. They witnessed the future of warfare, a future where industrial capacity would trump every other consideration. The image that haunted them, that impossible armada stretching from horizon to horizon, was the physical manifestation of democracy's latent power unleashed, of industrial might applied to a military purpose on a scale that rendered traditional military virtues irrelevant. They had prepared for war. They met instead the full industrial capacity of the United States. The German officers who watched those ships knew in that moment of terrible clarity that they were witnessing the end of war as they understood it, and the birth of something new, industrial warfare on a scale that made their professional expertise obsolete. Their defeat was not military but mathematical, not tactical but industrial, not a failure of courage but a shortage of trucks. It was a lesson written in steel across the waters of the English Channel on June 6, 1944. When nearly 7,000 ships announced that American industrial might had come to Europe, and nothing would ever be the same again.